Hello, and welcome to the Food Well Alliance and the Law Farm presentation of the Farm Law webinar series. This is the December 2021 episode, if you will, and we're doing a business law overview. This is supposedly a slower time of the year for farmers, so this is the time where I'm going to dump all sorts of information to you, give you things to think about during this slower time, and maybe we can schedule an office hour to go over some of these things. We're going to talk about business law as it affects businesses from conception to succession. So from when you have the business idea initially, all the way to if you were to sell that business, shut that business down, just the natural death of a business. First, let me introduce myself. I am Michelle Namer of the Law Office of Michelle Namer, LLC. I started the law firm to serve farmtrepreneurs in Georgia, specifically the founders of super small scale sustainable farms, and especially in the metro Atlanta area. The law farm is a social enterprise project. So it's really saying, can I use the social enterprise model for a law firm? And it's going pretty well. I'll get on my social enterprise soapbox in a little while too. You'll get to hear all the thoughts about that. And then farmtrepreneurs is a term that I use to describe the farmers of 2021 who are ready to provide good local food to their communities. They're focused on hyper sustainability. They're focused on, just solutions to a lot of the issues that we're seeing now more than ever. And they're starting farms in the same way that a lot of other folks are starting other startups. So it's a person who is business minded and working on a farm is what I call a farmtrepreneur. And the super small scale is a part of my passion for serving folk, or for closing the justice gap. Being able to hire an attorney is a luxury. We are not necessarily cheap, and there's this huge gap where folks who have a whole lot of resources do have access to attorneys. Big corporations have entire teams of attorneys as part of their corporate structure to ask questions, to have them reviewing contracts. Not everybody can afford that, but I do believe that having access to legal services to ask these sorts of questions about business legal issues can be a pivotal moment or opportunity for a farmtrepreneur or any entrepreneur. So the law firm is here to close that gap and to start providing these legal resources to really small scale sustainable farms that are working very much like startups in every sense of the word. My relationship with Food Well Alliance began in 2018 when I was selected as the Center for Civic Innovation's Food Fellow, one of a few. And that's when Food Well Alliance and I began working closely to start asking questions about how to solve this problem. What do farmtrepreneurs need? How do you get those resources to them? And as a result of us asking those questions together, the law farm is now a resource provider organization for Food Well Alliance. And that's how we offer these webinars, is through that partnership. We also offer office hours to farmtrepreneurs in Georgia. And I will talk more about that, but you know what? Let me go right into it, because these office hours are an incredible opportunity for farmers in Georgia, specifically this farmtrepreneur that I described. Because of the generous funding that Food Well Alliance provides to the law farm, any farmtrepreneur in Georgia can take advantage of these. If you are in Fulton, if you're farming in Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb, Gwinnett, and Clayton counties, the funding covers the charge completely, any of the charges that it would cost to be able to use these office hours. If you're a webinar attendee right now, and you're taking the time to get this baseline of information, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, and I want to offer you these same office hours for a deeply discounted rate of $75. To meet with me for an hour of strategizing and legal consultation would cost at least $250 usually. This discounted rate of $75 is an incredible opportunity to start asking questions understand the problems that you're dealing with, and it could save you a lot more than 75 in the long run. I do want to show y'all how to use Calendly. You guys have all successfully used Calendly because you're here tonight, but I do want to show anyone who is watching the recording how to use Calendly, just in case that's what has kept them from being here today. So this is calendly.com/the-law-farm/office hours. It's going to bring you to this page right here where you can directly set up an appointment based on my schedule. So my calendar is already in here. So you just have to look at your calendar, decide what a good date would be. If you wanted to meet me next Tuesday, if you know Tuesday is open, you would click on that. And I have this availability, 3 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock appointment. Click on the time that you would like, hit confirm, and it's just going to ask you for a few details. You can decide whether a phone call or whether a Zoom call is going to serve you best. Most issues, a phone call is just fine. The Zoom call is nice if you have access to that technology, because then we can sort of see each other face to face and I can share resources with you. And then I'm just going to ask you some questions about the sort of business that you're doing, where you're doing it, and I'll give you a chance to tell me a little bit about what you would like to go over. And that just helps me to get my mind right going into the office hour, to kind of have ideas structured, thinking through sort of issues of what you might be going through. It's perfectly fine if you put something in there and then when we meet, it becomes a completely different issue. Not only is that fine, it's very common. So that's Calendly, and please use it and set up those office hours. And I want to give y'all more details about what you can use these office hours for. For one, you can ask more in-depth questions about anything we cover tonight. You can use an office hour to decide how to structure a value-added endeavor. If you're starting a side, parallel business with your farm, or you want to take something on for extra money, we can talk about a game plan for that. You can use it to go over language for waivers that you might use on the farm, CSA agreements that you might be offering your clients, your customers, and other contracts that you're using to do business. We can use an office hour to research local zoning laws and or state and federal regulations. And it just gives you an opportunity to talk strategy with a lawyer on any topic, ranging from incorporation to employment matters to agritourism. Anything that has to do with business law or with farming specific business, we can have that conversation. They're a great way to check in on what I call DIY law, do-it-yourself law, which is the sort of law that 80-90% of Americans end up doing because of that luxury of being able to afford an attorney. So DIY law is what gets a startup going. It is what gets, especially a super small scale startup. It's what allows business to happen without that stalwart of not being able to afford an attorney. So DIY law, I'm all for it. Go use the internet, find the resources, get what you need to do. And this office hour gives you a chance to check in with a lawyer about it, to go over things, to get that extra layer of confidence that what you're doing is on point, that you're doing all you can to CYA, to cover your assets, and that everything is lined up in your favor as much as possible. So the life cycle of a business from conception to succession has a metaphor for farming, of course. So conception is the same as when we're planting a seed. That's when things are starting. That's when ideas are growing. There's going to be a lot of change really quickly. In the progression stage of the life cycle of a business, I compare that to tending to the crop. You just got to keep everything weeded. You got to make sure that all the plants are happy. You got to take care of it. And then succession is that harvest. It's when you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, or somebody gets to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And this life cycle, even though it may seem cyclical, like there's a timeline that it's beginning, end, you could be in the progression stage of your business and have a new idea, and suddenly you find yourself in that conception phase again. You've been farming for a while and suddenly you have a new idea for a value added endeavor, and so you're back to that conception phase. So even though I present this as a timeline with a beginning and a middle and an end, I think it's important to keep in mind that you could be anywhere in this. And when you're in that beginning stage, in that conception stage, this is where decisions are made, like, will you be a for-profit? Will you be a nonprofit? Where will you do this work? Will you buy land? Will you lease land? What does the market look like for your product? Doing those sort of research questions for your business are really important in the beginning. And then there's the progression stage where the rubber hits the road and you're growing your business. And this is where decisions are made, like, what kind of contracts do I need for my next undertaking? Am I going to do all the work myself? How do I protect myself from liability? And those sorts of questions. And then there's succession. Where will the business go? Everything has a life cycle at some point. Even if you see your farm out until your last days, it will have to end at that point too. Everything has an end. So where will the business go from here when it reaches an end? Who will enjoy the fruits of the labor? And the fruits go to very different places depending on whether or not you're a nonprofit or a for-profit entity, and how your governing documents were drafted. I say in my script from day one, but really you could have drafted your governing documents even after that. And I'll talk more about that as we go on. So tonight I'm going to go over some of the legal points to contemplate at each phase of this cycle. And yeah, remember, just because it feels like you've already planted the seed doesn't mean you won't be going back to that at some point in this process. All right, so my first point in planting the seed is that value-added ventures make good value-added products. Farmers, especially super small scale farmers, often take advantage of having value-added products for the farm. And value-added products in the traditional sense paints a picture of taking a product like strawberries that may get X amount per pound and require Y amount to plant, to grow, to harvest. And if it's preserved and made into jam, which only costs Z more to make, the strawberries can earn the farm 4 times X in profits. If you didn't follow all that math, there's no quiz at the end. But the point is, the strawberries may be worth more if they're preserved into jam. And the strawberry farmer may decide to start a cottage good business out of their home and sell jam at the market with their veggies. Traditional value-added products. There's still space there to talk to an attorney to make sure you understand the cottage goods requirements, and to make sure, if you want to put a label on there, that nobody else has a trademark that you're using as a label, or you might even be interested in your own trademark. Pin that. And I like to add that business savvy farmtrepreneurs, my clients, can create business models that spin off of traditional farming and still pull in more profit for the farm. And examples of this are using part of your property for an Airbnb, or maybe even if you have livestock, partnering with slow fashion folks and turning your, maybe, if you have sheep or something, turning your wool into some super hyper local product for slow fashion, which would be super fun and super cool, and hopefully more valuable in the long run for a farmer. So all these endeavors, plenty to talk about in office hours. And creating these value-added endeavors create diversification of the farm portfolio, and that accommodates ups and downs and changes in markets. So I put a pin in the "you may want to trademark your jam," because I want to point out that intellectual property can be a value-added product itself. And that's in the case that if you do have a jam or a hot sauce or something that just takes off in popularity, then the brand that you create around that suddenly has value that you can license out to partners, or when you start looking at retail distribution, getting that value for just the intellectual property alone, especially a trademark, can be a huge bonus for a farm. And speaking of trademarks, this is another resource I want to show y'all, is how to go to the USPTO website and find other trademarks to see what is trademarked and what's available for you. Let me switch my share. So here's uspto.gov. This is the Patent and Trademark Office website. It's not the office itself. If you, for trademarks in particular, and trademarks are slogans, business names, the name of a jam, anything that signals a customer of where a product is coming from so that they can rely on that as an indicator of the value of that product, that's a trademark. It's showing folks, this is peachy jam and there's no other jam like peachy jam. That's a horrible trademark, actually. Well, anywho, there is an intellectual property webinar that you can go back and watch the recording of if you want more details about good and bad trademarks or anything else about this in particular. But just real quick, if you hover over trademarks, where's the search? Right underneath application process, there's a bullet for searching trademarks. This is great, one, to make sure that you're not infringing on somebody else's trademark. I think especially in the farming world, there are, catchphrases and slogans that are very common and they come up and they, are used often. So checking to make sure that somebody hasn't already trademarked that is always wise. And then two, this is where you can go if you have a great idea and make sure it's not trademarked so that you can, boom, get your trademark application in if you so desire. So when I click that searching trademark, it gets a little hairy and dicey. It's not very straightforward right away. So you're gonna see this big title for search trademark database, and you'll go down to this gray button. It says the same words. Click it. And I suggest starting with a basic word mark search, this first option. These bottom two get into, they take a little nuance, a little pizzazz. So just starting here, this basic word mark search is a good start. And it pulls up this page right here where you can put in search terms. So if I was interested in peachy jam, let's just try that one. I think. So here stuff is coming up with peachy. There's peachy keen, just peachy products. And these are live trademarks right now. You see one has died. That means it is no longer in action. If you wanted the I'm peachy trademark, it may be a possibility still. But even though peachy is trademarked in lots of different ways, let's say my jam was actually just peachy. If I saw this on my search, I would click it and I scroll down a little bit to the services that it is connected with, that it's in affiliation to, or, and this just peachy, at first glance, I might think my trademark was taken. But when I click on it, I see that that's for reclining chairs, for furniture, for outdoor furniture. So it's in a totally different field than my peach jam. That's why it's a better trademark for that too. I'm telling you, go watch the intellectual property webinar. You're gonna love it. It's gonna explain all this stuff. But it's here for furniture, for chairs. This trademark may still be available. Just some things to keep on the lookout for making your intellectual property a value-added product. And again, this is something we can do together during an office hour. Don't be shy. Meet with me. All right, still in the conception phase. If you are starting a new business, if you're starting a brand new business, if you're starting a new entity that's underneath an already existing business umbrella, before you choose your entity type, think of where your money will come from and where it will go at the end. So this is my social enterprise soapbox moment. If I don't change this slide in the next 10 minutes, someone please interrupt me to ask what else I plan to talk about tonight. No, I tease. I will try my best to keep this short and sweet. But first, I want to state very clearly that the biggest distinguishing factor between nonprofit and for-profit business types, to me, in my humble opinion, that seeks to empower farmers to create sustainable businesses. In that humble opinion, the biggest distinction between the two is that a nonprofit at the end of its life cycle legally requires all the profits to be used toward the mission of the nonprofit entity. And a for-profit company puts the money earned in a business back into the people who built that business, or who are shareholders at the moment, or whatever else the governing documents say. Okay, so in English, this means that a nonprofit farm whose mission is to teach youth how to grow their own food could wind down with 100,000 in profits, and the entire 100,000 would have to go back into the mission of the farm. So that would be teaching youth how to grow their own food, and will likely need to be donated to a similarly situated nonprofit farm business. That's not a bad thing. If there's that kind of money flying around in the charitable enterprise of teaching youth how to grow their own food, that's great. But in the terms of raising farmers up and building equity, if that farm had been a for-profit farm, that same 100,000 that it had after winding down would be distributed according to the governing documents of that entity. Operating agreements are important. And that could go to the founders, that could go to starters, investors, the CEO, etc. Now, I totally understand that many farms, especially the farms I serve, are serving missions that fall into the categories of a nonprofit charity. And I'm totally with it. I'm here. Make the world a better place. Let's teach the youth how to grow food. Let's make the environment a better place. I'm here for the missions. But this is why I ask y'all to come with me today to think outside the box, because investors are starting to. And yes, a nonprofit may feel like a good fit because traditional grants serve nonprofits. There may be more money available to run your farm. But if there is the slightest chance, after doing market research and establishing startup costs, that your startup money will come from other places than traditional grants, consider being a for-profit entity. If you will be relying on loans or federal FSA loans or money from farm-serving entities that are outside the mold of traditional grants, consider being a for-profit entity. And don't worry that that will water down your social or environmental mission. For-profits serving a mission, like social enterprises or benefit corporations do, can build a for-profit company that serves that mission fully. Your governing documents, like the often overlooked operating agreement, capture your mission and can capture decisions like deciding that 50% of your profits will go back into your mission. You can take the best parts of a nonprofit and put it into your operating agreement and boom, capture that so that you are held accountable for doing that good, but you can also have some equity in the business that you're building. I was gonna show the Secretary of State's website here, but I'm gonna skip that because I realize that I'm running a little bit behind already. If you need to go over the initial applying for a business or looking for names process, schedule some time with me. I think it's almost too easy to start a business online. There aren't a whole lot of questions. There aren't a whole lot of hoops. One point that I do want to make, since I'm operating agreement over here with y'all, is that when you file to start a business with the Secretary of State, you kind of already create your articles of incorporation or your articles of organization by the time you have filled out that application. That kind of creates that online. But the operating agreement is a governing document that's completely separate from filing an entity with the Secretary of State. An operating agreement is something that you can start drafting or making decisions for before you even formally incorporate. And it's something that will be a living, breathing document as the business goes on. So just keep in mind that even though you can make a business fairly simply online by yourself, those other governing documents that you need for your business are not even brought up in that process, but they are tools that are there for you. Use them. Okay, still planting the seed. If you are leasing land, which is a very common way to start out with farming, know your lease in and out and forward and backward. Read it, know it. If you need to look a term up, Google it, and Black's Law Dictionary is probably the most legal definition you will get on the internet. Just know it. Take the time to understand every clause in it, to think through every plan that you have to do on that property and make sure that it is somehow addressed. Know your lease in and out and forward and back. Can't say that enough, but I'm going to try to say it enough. Know it in and out, forward and backward, and make sure that it's serving you. Please make sure that your lease is taking into consideration what you're doing, how you're doing it, and that it's serving you. When you're negotiating a lease on your end, start with your best case scenario. In a dream world, what would your lease look like? And then decide what you're willing to compromise on from there. But really think of what you need to run your business and to do it well, to do it as you have planned. And I know that it gets exciting sometimes. There's a great parcel of land. The landlord seems great, but I'm telling you, glossing over this negotiation, glossing over knowing what's in your lease can lead to unnecessary headache and heartache in the end, no matter how exciting a piece of property is. So consider things like, how much time would it take to get the infrastructure, your farm infrastructure, off of the property if the lease were terminated early? And make sure you have enough time allotted in the lease. And think about, how much money would you lose if you were asked to vacate the property in the middle of a growing season? And brand new farmers, this number may not be in your accounting history, so network and ask another farmer who farms like you what they might lose. And consider adding liquidated damages to the contract if you're asked to leave under certain circumstances. Know exactly how you will notify your landlord of issues on the farm. Is email enough, or do you need to send them a certified mail? It's up to you. It's up to your landlord. These are points you can negotiate, but know them. And know how y'all will argue if there's a disagreement. Please think of the good, the bad, and the ugly, especially if you're not hiring an attorney or coming to office hours to do these. Go to the land of the good, the bad, and the ugly. How will you argue if there's a disagreement? Even the best relationships have disagreements. So be especially clear in your contracts. Now, let me tell you though, here's a quick little sassy lawyer Michelle triple snap moment. If you are creating a contract with someone you are already in a relationship with, be even more clear than if it was with a stranger. Do not make the assumption that because you know each other well, you can kind of, gloss over that. No, if you want to preserve the relationship you're currently in, I promise you, heed this advice. You will be happy you did. Be even more clear about how things are going to go, what the expectations will be, and what will happen if you disagree. And if you are starting a venture and you're buying your land, then know your zoning code in and out and forward and back. So if you're leasing, know your lease like that. Also be familiar with the zoning code. But if you are buying land, know your zoning code in and out and forward and back. And I do want to show y'all my favorite resource when it comes to zoning. Is Municode. And the way you get to this page that I am sharing right now is by going library.municode.com. It's going to bring you to a map of the United States of America. You will click on Georgia if you're still in Georgia. And then you'll choose the municipality. It may be a city, it may be a county. I'm going to use Cobb County, for example, right now. So if I knew that my property that I was thinking of buying is located in unincorporated Cobb County, I would come to the Cobb County Municode Library. And this is all of the zoning, or all of the entire code of ordinances for Cobb County. And within this is the zoning. So let me repeat that real quick too. I love Municode. It's got the search function, I think, is user-friendly. It organizes things. If you're used to using online resources, I think it organizes them fairly well and user-friendly with the chapters and everything. But I want to repeat this. This is the entire code for Cobb County. It has the entire code. Zoning is within that code. So getting used to like reading ordinances in general is it's a talent. So practice it, especially if you think you may be acquiring other properties or moving around to different properties. Just be very familiar with these ordinances, how you read them and what they mean, because they will make or break your opportunity to be able to do certain things on your property. Let me see, I'm here. If I can't find the zoning quick enough, then I'm going to just move on and say, come visit me. Okay, perfect. It's the last chapter in your code. And in part 1, so this part 2 is state enabling legislation. It doesn't matter for my purposes, but I opened up this drop down and went all the way down until I saw zoning. And this is where you will need to find it. There's a webinar for this. If you need more details about how this process works, there is a local government and zoning webinar, and I will talk you through the entire process in that webinar of locating your parcel, of being able to find it on the zoning maps, and then be able to come back here to use that information to decide what you can and can't do on your piece of property. So go back, reference that webinar if you'd like to, or you can just skip the middleman and come hang out with me in an office hour, and we will check out the zoning for a piece of property you're looking at. Again, your dream property could come along and it might seem like the best opportunity to forget everything and go for it, because it might not be there for long, but I promise you, you will thank me. Take a minute, check out the zoning, really become familiar with what the zoning allows and what your business plan is, and make sure that you're buying a piece of property that is going to allow you to do what you want to do with your farm. I love Municode. I'm kind of a local government nerd in general, so maybe that's part of it, but I just think it's a phenomenal resource for farmers, especially farmers who are not in traditional rural farming neighborhoods, so to speak. So Metro Atlanta farmers, and even just beyond the metro part, zoning, being the zoning nerd that I am, here we go. We're gonna have a little bit of a history lesson. Zoning was created to kind of keep the rural out of the cities, to keep the farming on the periphery. You can farm out here, but when you come into these, established cities, they're like, the original HOA. We want it to look like this and be like this. We don't want pigs everywhere and chickens everywhere, but haha, we do. 2021 now, and we do want pigs everywhere, and we do want chickens everywhere. So a lot of zoning is antiquated when it comes to farming, sustainable farming, and small scale farming. And be mindful of that. All right, we're moving on to progression. So you've started your business. You've leased the perfect piece of property. You negotiated your lease like a boss, and I'm proud of you for it. And now you're ready to start doing business. My first legal tip for you when you're doing business is to keep records and keep things separate. Knowing what your business is, knowing what it is doing, and keeping it separate from you are all imperative for legal business success. And I say success loosely because, and here's why not everyone wants a lawyer at the party. Sometimes success is just softening a financial or liability blow. Sometimes success is just mitigating damages. But knowing what your business is, knowing what it's doing, and keeping it separate from you are imperative for legal business success. Keeping business records is vital. First of all, financial records and profit losses can be recorded with Excel or QuickBooks. There are other programs. This is a great space to network with other farmers and see what they've used to start out. Contracts between you and clients or customers or CSA members, as well as you and your suppliers or your partners, are other important records to keep. I'll go into my post-it note thing. There are other important records to keep, so come up with a system for that. There's not necessarily like a legal equivalent of Excel or QuickBooks, so come up with a system of saving those things, of documenting that. It can be an old paper record system, or it can be a very savvy, cutting-edge, technology-based one. Either way, come up with a method for that. Before a contract is formalized into a document, keep track of the terms and the negotiations. Post-it notes are a great start, but remember to get as much as you can confirmed in writing. An email is a great writing. It's a great habit to get into starting anytime, that when you have a potentially contract-inducing conversation, send a follow-up email detailing what you took away from the conversation and what you believe was said and what you understood to be the conclusions, and ask the other person for confirmation that that's what they heard too in that email. And that gives you a chance to capture, we've had this conversation, we were talking about this product, we were talking about this cost of the product and this time frame. So here's what I took away from this. Is that also what you took? And that's a great way to just capture that process of that part of the contract process. Oh, thank you, Justin. You still see the web browser. Thank you. I can handle like 1.5 moving parts. 2 is a lot. Thank you. All right. Keep records, keep things separate. And get back to where I was. Yes, get that confirmation that everyone's on the same page. And it's also super helpful because if what you're saying back to them isn't what they thought or what they heard, you can go ahead and hash that out and get that clarity that you need. Communication and clarity are key in business relationships. Having a written record for communication is evidence, and that's where it becomes a legal thing. Speaking of evidence, rules and laws about recording conversations, it comes up a good bit in conversations that I have with clients and potential clients. And rules about recording conversations usually come down to rules about what can be used as evidence if there's ever a lawsuit. So it may be worth it in some cases to record a conversation, even if it's not out in the open that it's being recorded. But I take it one step further and I say it's always fair to ask someone if you can record a conversation for your records. If you're having an important, pivotal conversation for your business relationship, ask them if you can record it. It behooves them to have it recorded as well. And in that situation, unless one of the parties is planning to act nasty to begin with, without that, maybe everybody agrees and it benefits everyone. I have to believe that most people mean well and will work with you to keep records of deals and negotiations to try and mitigate arguments, disagreements, and those sorts of things. I have to believe that. So now when I talk about keep it separate from you, and I have a bad habit of talking about you when I'm talking about your business, and I need to kick that habit, and you need to kick it now too. Let's both today, all of us, everybody in this webinar right now, let's make it a hard, fast New Year's resolution that we will be very clear when we are talking about ourselves, another person, and a business entity. And it's especially important if you are a single member managed LLC, because when you are a single member managed LLC, it is very easy to get yourself and your business confused with one another at times. So we're making a pact right now that we're going to do everything we can to exaggerate the distinction between us and our startups. Creating an LLC or any business entity is creating another person for all extensive purposes. And the protections that you as a person benefit from creating your business as a person will be lost if the two are indistinguishable. For example, if I am running an agritourism operation on my farm, the hope would be that if someone gets hurt on my property, the business I created to operate the agritourism operation would be liable. My business would be liable. And hopefully not me as an individual. That's the hope. That being said, if I'm the person that got hurt on an agritourism operation and I sue, I'm going to sue whoever has the resources to right the wrong at hand. And if this is you as the person and you as the business, if you don't know, you as the business right now, if your business does not have good insurance, and by good, I mean a large enough coverage amount and coverage for the activity that you are doing. Let me repeat that. With your farm business, having the right insurance means having the right amount to cover damages that could happen and coverage for the activities that you are doing. Not all farm coverage policies are created equally, and not all of them ever think that you might be doing the novel, awesome, enterprising things that you're doing. So make sure you have the coverage limits you need and the coverage for the activities that you're doing. So I back up. If your farm business does not have the right insurance and you as an individual have more assets than your business, i.e. you own the property, the land is in your name where the injury occurred, I will do my best as the injured person to use any commingling between you as a person and your business, any commingling of funds to prove that your business structure was a facade to attempt to keep you from being responsible for the harms that you caused. That's what I'll do as the injured person. That's what I'll do as the injured person's attorney. So that's why it is incredibly important to protect against this, to have a separate bank account for your business, a separate email for your business, a separate credit card for your business, and deny yourself any urges to use them incorrectly in a convenient pinch. And wherever possible, create standard operating procedures about how you will pay yourself, how your business will rent its property and pay for those things. Just do everything in your power to make sure that you stay separate from your business entity. All right. This I feel like is a big one for farmers. Volunteers can cost more than expected. First of all, make sure everyone who comes onto your farm knows what to expect. When I say volunteers can cost more than expected, this is from the perspective of an attorney who knows that if somebody gets hurt on your property, if something goes wrong, if they mess things up, you're stuck to deal with that liability in a lot of cases. So every time you invite somebody onto your farm property, you're taking a risk that something could go wrong, that something could happen. And farming has extra risks to begin with. I've recorded an entire webinar on premises liability at this point. So if you're curious about what liability looks like in terms of somebody being hurt on your property, go check out the premises liability webinar. I talk about what duty you owe to someone who just comes onto your property because, you know, it suits them versus it suits you, all those things. I tease that out. But here, just keep in mind that when people come on your farm, they should know what to expect. There should be signage. If there's any part of your land that has a dangerous hole, a yellow jacket nest, I mean, scan for these things generally, make folks aware. And if you do have volunteers, have a huddle with them and be very clear about the risks of being on your farm. Let them know what farming is like, the hazards of farming generally, and the specific hazards of your farm. So that being said, again, go check out the premises liability webinar for more about what you can do to minimize risks and liabilities associated with inviting people onto the farm. Not to mention, volunteers actually aren't great labor. If you need real work done, there's that part too. But that being said, people, myself included, do love working on farms. I love volunteering on farms. We love to see the fields, get our hands a little dirty, help local farmers on their missions to making better communities with better food. And we like to step into a time and a place where we can connect with soil and nature free of all of the cares of the world. So in this idyllic opportunity, call it agritourism. Call it agritourism, clearly define what it will entail, develop standard operating procedures around it for obtaining waiver signatures, for checking your premises for potential harms, and making sure your agri-tourists know exactly what to expect on a farm and how to behave, and have plenty of value-added products to offer us. You have a captive audience. I joke. But when you are ready to hire employees or independent contractors, take the time to know what insurance coverage you need as an employer, including workers' comp. Employees or independent contractors are being paid to do the work that makes you money. So the costs and benefits of having them on your property doing what they're doing is much more fair, for lack of better language. It's much more understandable why a paid employee would put themselves at the risks of farming. So speaking of being at that point where you're ready to have hired help, when you get to that point of having employees or interns or independent contractors, remember that you're the boss. Hire and fire with the golden rule. Treat others as you would want to be treated. When you determine it's the best time to hire someone to help you in your farm mission, take a little time on the front end and get real honest about what you would like if you were employed on your farm. I am a social enterprise advocate, so I first think of asking yourself, are you paying your workers a living wage? But no, this is not always something employers think about, and it's not something I expect you to necessarily grapple with. And you kind of don't have to because of minimum wages being set so low. So do what you need to do. And agricultural work generally is excluded from the Fair Labor and Standards Act. I'll get into that again in a second. But happy help is usually good help. So keep that in mind with payment. And then also, what would you need to know to be successful working at your farm? Here's where standard operating procedures from the get-go can be of service to your operations. Think through all the processes your hired help need to be aware of: food safety protocol, expectations of work hours, even in nasty weather, your lean procedures for maximum efficiency in the walk-in coolers. All of these things should be spelled out as clearly as possible and included in an employee handbook that also lets a new hire know your farm's value and expectations. Now, I do want to back up 1 second and say, when I say standard operating procedures, This can be a very well organized, highly technical process where you create Word documents and you file them with electronic files and you keep your standard operating procedures. They're super in depth. Or you could just have a journal where you keep track of what you do and how you do it. The standard operating procedures show that you have habits. And if you have good habits, that's good evidence if something ever goes wrong. You immediately have something to turn to that is documented, recorded evidence that this is what I do. I do it every time. These are my standard operating procedures and they're good. I, get into negligence and stuff, but we'll talk about all that one-on-one in an office hour if we need to. But spell things out in an employee handbook. Employee handbooks should also let anyone that you're hiring know what disciplinary actions can and will apply in what circumstances, and also what offenses may result in immediate termination. Georgia is an at-will state, and thus you as an employer have wide latitude to fire employees. Nonetheless, transparency and following your own employment guidelines give you a great start of a defense that the employee knew what to expect. Again, what information would you want to know about being fired? Let your hired help know. And real quick, I want to talk about, so you can, when you decide to hire help, you may hire interns, you may hire independent contractors, and then you may get to the point where you're actually hiring employees for your farm. So with interns, you can develop some really great win-win internship opportunities on the farm, exchanging lodging and education for the interns' work. Having a developed program with an application process builds more security and having committed, capable help, and of also backing up this idea that this is an intern. This person was hired as an intern. I hire interns for this purpose. Creating more of an established program makes it clear that this is an internship. It may not be highly paid. It may not be paid at all, but this is an internship and there is a benefit to both parties. And then before you take the full plunge of hiring employees, you may hire independent contractors. And they have a tax distinction as well as a legal distinction from your employees. An independent contractor does. Tax-wise, independent contractors pay self-employment tax on the wages that you pay them. So there's no need for you to set up payroll deductions for Social Security or unemployment or any of the other automatic deductions. Legally, these workers are self-employed, so therefore they may do a job for you, but they do it their own way and with their own tools. And there are multiple factors in distinguishing that legal independent contractor from legal employee. And they mostly come down to control and the length of the working relationship. If you're controlling training, hours of location of work, hours and location of the work, and the method of executing the work itself, it starts to look more like an employment relationship. Likewise, if you are working with someone indefinitely without discrete projects for them to work on, it starts to look more like an employment relationship. So your agreements or handbooks can develop the legal relationship on paper, but just know that saying on paper that someone is an independent contractor, if you start doing things that look like you're an employer and they're an employee, the fact that you called them the independent contractor in your agreements or in your handbook doesn't necessarily trump in that case. So that's where we get to employees. When you start having control over how somebody's doing the work, when they're doing the work, they're using your tools, this is a long-standing relationship, we're in employee land. And employees on farms have some fun nuance. I won't even pretend to have seen or touched on confirming or denying all of the things I hear about farm labor and what applies and what doesn't. Nonetheless, when you do decide to hire employees, keep in mind there are accounting factors to take into consideration, and you'll want to talk with a tax professional, maybe in addition to the lawyer. So speaking of the lawyer piece, the Fair Labor and Standards Act likely does not apply to your farm enterprise. And that's the piece of legislation that governs minimum wage and overtime requirements. If you happen to be a large scale farm that has found your way over to this webinar, it may apply to you, but most of the farms that I come into contact with are not governed by the FLSA. So that's a boom, hard black and white area. And then what if stuff hits the fan? Hits the fan, you're doing business. What if stuff goes wrong? And I really should have called this slide, what about when stuff hits the fan? Because it happens. I mean, that's the risk of owning your own business, of doing your own thing, is that we have to put out fires just as often as we get to celebrate the fruits of our labor. So if stuff hits the fan, first of all, take a deep breath. There are lots of different levels of stuff hitting the fan. Clear communication goes incredibly far when things start to feel tense, as can record keeping. I'm going to go back to the feels tense piece. If you start feeling confused about a business relationship, or having this moment where you're kind of, when you put your head on your pillow, you're thinking about a business thing that you're kind of, when you start getting to that point, start mitigating, get in there, don't avoid it. I know it's uncomfortable. I know we don't want to think about those things. Don't avoid them, get in there and start seeing what you need to do, create clear action plans of how you can gain that confidence back, put those worries to rest, and be able to sleep at night running your business. If you are an aggrieved party and you have created an action plan, you've tried communicating with the other person, you've tried to mitigate, what's going on. If you are the aggrieved party, if you are the person who has been wronged, let me back up actually. Before I talk about if you're the aggrieved party or who the aggrieved party is, this is the space for what lawyers call alternative dispute resolution. ADR. It's a common term in contracts. It's a common term used amongst lawyers. Alternative dispute resolution. If stuff hits the fan and you have a written contract already, that's going to govern what you're going to do when stuff hits the fan. A good contract will have a clause about what happens when you disagree. And you can start that right out with a lawsuit. That's fair. If, this goes south, we litigate it and we do it in the state of Georgia under Georgia law. That's one way of doing it. But there are alternative ways to dispute things. So arbitration is a step down from a lawsuit. An arbitrator will come in, will hear your case similar to a lawsuit, and will create a binding decision for you. It often takes less time and less resources to arbitrate a case. So arbitration is something you may want to consider. Mediation is another option, and mediation is just conflict resolution to me in its best place, but I am more of the peaceful warrior. A mediator will come in, an objective third party will come in and hear both of your cases and help you kind of come to an agreement about what you're going to do. So they're not going to create a binding judgment like an arbitrator or a judge will, but they're going to help you sort of see eye to eye and remember the common ground and come to an agreement. Bourbon, go lay down. You're a good boy. And then before thank you, buddy. Go lay down. Before you even get to mediation though, the options are actually endless. Another thing you could do is say, if we disagree on something, we can't see eye to eye, we're going to each call in one objective. Bourbon, thank you. Lay down. Good boy, relax. We're going to each call in a friend who we know is objective, and those two friends are going to choose a third party, and they're going to decide what we need to do for this argument. You can get creative and get clever. Just put it on your contract. Everybody agrees to it. Everybody's governed by that in the end. And I am all about using every alternative dispute resolution possibility before a lawsuit. The justice system is what it is. It has a lot of strengths. It has a lot of weaknesses too. So if you can keep things out of court and keep things in a place where somebody knows your business, knows farming, and understands where you're coming from, I think that's really important. So if you are an aggrieved party and you're thinking, I want to sue this person, forget all this stuff, I want to sue them, just keep in mind that it costs close to $300 just to file a claim in most cases. So think about the time and the money involved with litigation and decide if it's worth it. And representing yourself pro se, if your case has under $15,000 in damages, it's going to be in small claims court. If it falls into that category and you do represent yourself in court, the judges in small claims court are very used to working with pro se litigants. That's the word for representing yourself. So it's absolutely doable. If you decide to file a lawsuit, this is a space for DIY law. You can do that without a lawyer. You can do that as an individual. If someone sues you, the number one piece of advice I have for you is to not ignore it. Do not ignore the issue. If somebody sues you, pay attention right away to any formal documents you receive. And if you're not sure if it's a formal document, treat it as such until you are sure otherwise. Excuse me. Do not ignore the issue and pay attention to the deadlines to respond. Your case might be entirely defendable, but if you don't follow the procedural deadlines, you can still have a judgment enforced against you. Excuse me. So please, 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 if somebody sues you and you're served, do not ignore the issue. Face it head on, find your deadlines, and just go and make your case. Again, if it's a case it's worthless, not worthless, I don't like that language. If it's a case where the judgment is valued at less than $15,000, you're going to be in small claims court, especially in small claims court. They are used to pro se litigants on both sides. So you can represent yourself. It's absolutely doable. In office hours, I'm not going to use office hours to represent you in any way, shape, or form in litigation. It's just not the time or the place. But it is a place, if something were to come up like this, and you know you're going to be taking it on yourself, office hours are a great place to come, get that confirmation about documents, understand your game plan, and then you can go execute it on your own and do that DIY law. Of course, I do believe it's always best to have an attorney if that is a luxury that you can afford. I always think that it, again, this is one of the weaknesses of the justice system, in my opinion, but you do put yourself in a better position, especially if the other side is represented, by having representation. If neither of you are represented, you're at least on an even playing field with that. If the other side in a lawsuit has an attorney, do everything you can to get that representation. It just puts you on a fair playing field for sure. And now we're getting to harvest. When you are ready to wind down a business, you may be ready to wind down a business because you're retiring. You may be ready to wind down a business because it just hasn't made the profits that you expected it to, but you've been watching your books, you've been doing the market research, and you just can't understand why it's not doing it. And you'd like to get out while you're kind of ahead or like barely, in the red. You want to get out before it gets worse. You may want to sell your business. Somebody else may have been watching you farm for the last few years, and they say, I want to do what you're doing right now. I want to take over. There's all sorts of ways that the business can be ending, could wrap up, and you're harvesting. When this happens and you still have existing contracts, if you still have agreements or any pending business relationships, refer to your existing contracts for how to terminate those. For most of the harvest slides, spoiler alert, I'm just going to remind you how important doing the legwork is on the front end to support you on the back end. So refer to your existing contracts for how to terminate. And I know that you took all the time in the world to think through your business relationships and to clearly decide how either party could terminate and what that would look like and what steps would be taken next. So just refer to those contracts. and use that language there. If you didn't take the time at the front end, or you haven't yet, I joke about everything being so much easier if you do, but there's no time like the present. If your documents are not all in line at this point, if you don't have terms to tell you how to end your contracts that you currently have, start getting them in line now. And worst case scenario, you decide you never want to have to deal with actual contract language, even though I think everyone watching this webinar does care about that stuff. So if you decide you don't want to be crystal clear on paper with that, still take a deep breath, just keep communication clear and open about what you're planning to do next. Let the folks who you're doing business with know that you're closing down, see what you need to do to make things right. Try and get that in writing and, in an email confirmation, but just keep communication clear and open, and transitions are going to be easier. They're easiest with great documents, but they're still very easy with just clear, open communication. And then know how your profits will be distributed. As I said in the beginning, if you have a nonprofit, you're going to need to find another charitable organization with the mission that yours had and distribute the profits that way. If you are a for-profit and you are a single member managed LLC, you may just keep all the profits and go ahead and add that to your bank account. You can go ahead and pay yourself out. Hopefully you have standard operating procedures for how you will pay yourself out to show that you took that formality. And if you are not a single member managed LLC, if you have other shareholders, other stakeholders, other members of your LLC, your operating agreement will tell you how to distribute those profits. And again, if your operating agreement doesn't have that part, if that got missed somehow, clear, open communication will help you decide how to distribute your profits. And then toast to the legwork at the beginning of your business, making your transition so easy. Again, I sound like a broken record, but I can't say it enough. A little bit of legwork at the beginning helps to mitigate a lot of the headache or frustrations in any other point, whether stuff hits the fan, whether you're closing your business for good, doing that work to make sure that your documents are in line, that you've dotted your legal I's and crossed your legal T's. Those sorts of things are really just going to help. It's just going to give you, it's going to be a lot of work at the beginning, but it will give you some peace when the time comes and you need those documents. So the takeaways from tonight are that when you start a business, I moved away from farm metaphors and I moved into architecture metaphors. You're welcome. When you start a business, you are the architect, the contractor, and the designer, building it from the ground up. It's a lot of work, but go ahead and use that to your advantage. You know you're going to be doing a lot of work. You know that we have not picked the easy route being entrepreneurs. Use this to your advantage and make sure that the terms in your contracts, that the way you're doing things is serving you and makes sense with your business plan. You will always thank yourself for spending the time doing legwork to think through new business endeavors clearly, especially the legal tools, the legal opportunities in that. And lastly, you can handle a lot of your business legal needs on your own. It is by no means a requirement to have a lawyer to be successful at business. But it never hurts to bring in an expert when you're doing a lot of it yourself, when you can, to confirm your game plan, to get that added boost of confidence. So if you have more questions or you want that added boost of confidence, sign up for office hours. Come hang out with me for an hour. You can do that at calendly.com/thelawfarm/office hours. And if your farm operations are in Clayton, Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, or Gwinnett counties, these office hours are completely free of charge. Thank you, Foodwell Alliance. And if you're outside these counties and you're on this webinar, I'm offering these office hours to you for $75, which is a huge discount. And then also follow the Law Farm on Instagram for more legal entrepreneur, farmtrepreneur tips. Updated regularly. Yes, Justin asked, can we access the previous webinars? If you go to the lawfarm.com, there is a button on the navigation panel that says 2021 webinars, and that's all the recorded webinars. The conservation use valuation assessment webinar. Oh, I put a direct message to Justin, I just realized, with the lawfarm.com, but I am entering the lawfarm.com to everyone now. This is the website, the lawfarm.com. The conservation use valuation assessment recorded webinar is not up yet, but it will be up within the next few days with this webinar. So yeah, sign up for office hours. Come see me. And does anybody have any questions? Did anything come up during that? Or did anybody come into this webinar with a question that you'd like to ask? Awesome. I hope some questions do come up. I look forward to talking to y'all one-on-one. And I can't thank you enough.